Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker. For 1502, it is good to see you.
Mikey Ames, how are you today? Time for another edition of Lead Better, where we get together to talk about the day's field note from admired leadership. And today we're talking about the domino effect. So this is about leadership in pizza. Oh wait, sorry, different domino effect. This,
No, well, if you're going through the drive-through at Domino's, it might be the pay it forward effect. So
I guess it could be.
there may
So
have been people who thought that that's what it meant.
Well, actually, we may not get into pizza, but we are going to get into Coca-Cola. So the title of the field note is Reciprocity and the Domino Effect of Kindness. Now,
Right.
I do know from my history of being busy on the internet for most of the last couple of decades, kindness, it can be a little viral thing. It's not always the thing that grips serious people trying to make major changes in themselves and their organization. But we can explore this. It might go in a direction that we're not expecting, but it does begin with this very famous experiment about Joe and the Coca-Cola. Now, I can set it up, but if you have a window on it, go for it.
No, you call it famous, and the field note calls it famous. I had never heard of this before. So best for you to go through it from at least a perspective of a little bit of knowledge of it.
Yes. So it is not about a domino effect where you also get a Coke bottle, a liter of Coke with your pizza. It's a different thing.
Okay.
So, and it's a simple thing. So there was an experiment years ago, and it is in the literature, and you see it where you have a person who's the subject of the study, right? And somebody comes in, sits down, they're ostensibly the colleague in this scenario, and they make a phone call. And on the phone call, sometimes they're being very polite to the person they're talking to. The other person who's being studied probably doesn't know all of what's going on in this, is listening, overhearing the conversation. Sometimes polite, but sometimes very rude.
Right.
Conversation ends, then Joe walks out of the room. So if, let's say it's my wife. So Liz is sitting there at the table. She's thinking, that guy's a real jerk. Or maybe she's thinking, he seems like a very nice guy, right? Now, at some point, Joe comes back in the room, and in certain circumstances, he's carrying some Cokes. He's got one for himself. He brought an extra one. He offers it to this person that he's just been introduced to, and they, oh, thank you, right? Now, sometimes he comes back and he doesn't have another Coke. He just sits down by himself, right? So you've got a couple of different variations of what can happen, but the test here is that at some point later, he kind of says in conversation, I have some raffle tickets. Would you like to buy a raffle ticket? Here's the thing, you might win. And what they found is that the people would buy the raffle ticket influenced by the act of kindness, whether or not the guy had been rude on the phone before or not. Meaning, if I come back in with a Coke and I offer you something, you might forgive me for being rude on the phone, or it might double down on how nice you thought I was because I was being nice on the phone. But all of a sudden, the fact that you've given me a Coke for free, or you were thoughtful, I am much more likely to buy a raffle ticket from you. That's the reciprocity here. So the issue comes into effect in our organizations with kindness. Can kindness create a reciprocity in what's going on in the culture of an organization?
Right. Now, it's an interesting experiment because there's a double priming that's going on.
Yes.
The initial priming is whether or not you're being kind or rude on the phone. It makes me think there may have been a previous study where it was just the act of being kind or rude on the phone.
Could be.
Was the thing. And now here's a follow-up study where there's a second priming that says, I'm going to actually do an act of kindness instead of you just observing what I did to this other person.
Yeah.
And choosing to go that way. So it's interesting that at that point in this study, where and whenever it was conducted, that they were more interested in the actions, which we're very interested in as well as our leadership firm too.
Right.
So,
but now let me ask you this, which is, we'd all like to think that we're kind, and we'd like to think that we're part of cultures and organizations that have a moral undercurrent of a genuine goodwill for each other and the world. However, I think that you can confuse kindness with being nice. Do you think that's always the case?
I think there's a even worse. I don't mean to sidestep your question, and I'm sorry if I do, but I think there's probably a worse confusion with people mistaking kindness for their idea of caring for people in their mind, right? And we have a few coaches in our firm who've said, I get all the time from people, from leaders, oh, if the people in my organization just knew how much I cared about them, if they just knew how much I cared, which means that your version of caring is you feeling angst in the middle of the night over X or Y, but it's not actually doing any acts of kindness. And so this always leads to a conversation about authenticity and what it means to be authentically caring. And it needs to be something that you're actually doing as opposed to just something that's in your mind. Now, your conversation specifically about kindness and niceness, I think a lot of people just think of that on a semantic level of like, oh, let's separate those two definitions out. And I'm going to be nice, so I'm not going to tell you about the spinach between your teeth, but the real kind thing to do, which I understand that argument. And I like the idea of teasing out kind and nice in that way. But more than anything, I hope that it leads to actions instead of just being a semantic argument.
Right. Well, and part of underlying what you're talking about, which is, it's not in my head, it's what I do. We then get to an admired leadership fundamental, in which is that your character is demonstrated in this sort of consistent authenticity where it's not a technique. It is more of how I go about in the world. So the problem, if you're saying, hey, leaders should be setting the example of kindness, is that if you go in trying to act kind or you're using it as a technique, it is likely to backfire in some dramatic ways, because then you're just using it as an inauthentic ploy. And I think people read that right away. And that's even just dealing with the issue of kind, not even dealing with the issue of kindness might also actually be being tough. And we talk about tough love.
If a person says, I don't find myself naturally thinking of the kind thing to do very often. I'd like to be more kind. So, this is the kind of leader I want to be. So I'm going to find ways to actually act kind, to go out of my way to find the things where people recognize that I don't need to do this. I'm not looking for anything in return to do it, but I don't naturally think that way. So it's going to feel authentic when I do it. So how is it that I get past this feeling of inauthenticity, especially at the beginning of this crusade of me turning the corner and being a kind person, right? How do I do that, right? How do I get past that feeling of inauthenticity?
Well, that's certainly a one of the conundrums here, but then let me extend it and see if this works. So if you also then think about who are you being kind to? Like you can be kind to a person, but unkind to the team. If you're coddling a star performer or indulging them because of their particular status with a client and you're punishing everybody else, are you being kind? Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe the kindest thing to do as the leader is to let that star performer go or find a way to have a conversation with that person that doesn't embarrass them, right? Those are acts of kindness. And we talk about that. Of how do people feel safe in your meetings? Are they not embarrassed on your watch, even if they are transgressing in some way? And I used to think about it this way. It doesn't directly apply, but I remember back when I was a reporter and I was covering early on a case where a young man was arrested for murdering 2 young women here in Western Pennsylvania. And this was now like the middle of the night, and I was out there. It was raining. They'd arrested him. They're marching him, like they're walking him to the, into the police station. And I had the microphone, and I had the cameraman with me, and I'm asking this guy, what happened out there? What happened to these women? Did you kill them? Why did all of this come about? You could sit there and say, am I being kind to him? Does that feel like really nice to him? No. So even if you're using kind of like an old golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Well, let's see. If I killed 2 young women, would I like it if reporters were pressing me for those answers? I would absolutely not. I would feel it with deep anguish, maybe even in guilt, hopefully, right? But if you're treating other people as you would like to be treated in like circumstances or should be treated in like circumstances, might be a more expansive definition. So don't think, and I think this is what I was trying to underline, which is don't think that just saying, oh, there's going to be a reciprocity of kindness. waving the K card is not a get out of jail free card. There is a discipline that comes in being a leader who is responsible for the moral climate of their team that requires something deeper than just a Band-Aid of niceness.
And that's the difference in your reporter analogy as well. You're broadening out your view, and your kindness is to your readers, to your constituency, to the community that you're serving as a reporter, and not necessarily an individual. Yeah. And so there might be some. So as leaders, as you do this, as you're mentioning the star player, is there a strategic advantage if you're going to do this to be like, let's intentionally start this kindness crusade with people who are intentionally 2 or 3 rungs below me on the ladder, that I don't want to make it feel like I'm doing this just for star performers first? Is there an advantage if I'm trying to do this to intentionally go down low, which isn't the right metaphoric word there, but to go to, those folks that are maybe 2 rungs down the corporate ladder than you are in your first demonstration of this?
Well, I think that should be just a regular part of how you go about in the world, right? Now, when we talk about consistency and not using things as techniques, part of the goal here would be, let's say you're not normally an emotively kind person and you're like, I can't do this. You can start doing things that are just more mindful of the other person's circumstance. And the more small measures you do, in fact, starting with the person 3 rungs down the ladder might be the easiest way to go, right? Before you're trying to do the kind thing, which might even seem to be manipulative for the executive vice president who's down the hallway from you, it might be more the other way. Now, you can over-index on that because there's a lot of leaders out there who are like, well, I bring coffee for everybody, or I know the security guard's name. And they actually use it to elevate themselves rather than just actually taking a true interest in, does that security guard have a life beyond the building that they're in? And you actually know and care about it. And it's not just a technique to make yourself look good. Like, what a great leader that guy is. Right. But you can start to work on little demonstrations of behavior that are just attentive, and that will start to become more and more part of your style.
Right. Okay. Let's get to the nitty gritty here about drive-through windows, because we made a joke about it with Domino being in the title earlier. But when it comes to this type of pay it forward chain, pay it backward chain kind of thing happening in the Starbucks window, there's jokes all over the place in media about how it frustrates people and how they don't like it. And I think the reason that if you get caught in a pay it forward chain, it's alluded to in our field note as well, there becomes this moment of like, I want to be an independent thinker here, so I'm just going to not do this anymore. Then you feel a little bit guilty, and so maybe you feel pressure to actually do it, but then it doesn't feel like kindness. It feels like you just are participating in this chain.
Right,
so
you're just pressured in.
Right, so we're not advising that your organization formalize any version of a pay it forward chain in whatever version of a drive-through window happens in the hallways of your organization. These need to be spontaneous. They need to be unexpected. Once these kinds of things become like an expected reward, it's kind of ruined, because that expectation is something we're trying to avoid. We want these to be surprising acts. We want these to be out of nowhere acts. And I'd always find it. So when it was brought up in the field note, like this feeling of independence, that people will rebel against it if it feels like a formalized thing in your organization. It's exactly the way I feel when I'm caught up in it in the Starbucks line. It's like I want to feel and act independent here. I don't want to act. Plus, I'm a little bit afraid that the person behind me's, coffee order is 10 times what I was going to pay. Right.
Right.
So how are we going to go through that? I think the key there is to leave it unexpected.
Yeah, I do. I think that's the truth about all giving in general, right? And I'm sure we're all glad that part of our taxes go to help those who are less fortunate, but we're compelled to pay those taxes. There's nothing, that sort of sort of optional about those things. So look, there in the end, when you look at this, you can certainly say that nice is sort of about making people feel comfortable, but being kind is about growth. And that can mean that we might have to avoid the trap of just thinking that nice is this sort of saccharine thing. Kindness can actually require a great deal of courage. And niceness can actually be cowardly in many respects. But what we do know as leaders is we can create a culture, and that culture can exude those characteristics. Sometimes there's a grocery chain in the Southeast called Publix. It's not in my area right here, but I spent a lot of time in Florida. And whenever I've been at Publix, everybody seems to be really attentive and friendly in ways that seem to be surprising. And I know that's part of the culture they try to cultivate. I don't think it's not like every time you go in, you expect balloons, but I don't think I've ever had a violation of that in a Publix. I've certainly seen it in other places. My wife took our youngest and two of her cousins to the movies to see Superman the other day. Really nice, theater in a beautiful mall, and the clerks were surly. There was discord in the theater itself. People had to be, had to call to take people out of the theater. When the two cousins went into the bathroom, somebody exposed themselves to them, and it was trashed and dirty. And they couldn't get out of that theater fast enough. And it just seemed to be in every direction. Now, I'm not saying that just if the clerk had been less surly, that everything would have taken care of itself. What we do know is that things seem to breed and grow. And we as leaders do have responsibility for those moral climates and the values that we're expressing. And so let's get better at that. Some kindness is good. Just don't define it inappropriately.
Right. Fantastic. Okay, thanks. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's conversation. Great. I've got some great things to...
Oh, yeah. No, it's a good one. I won't even give you any hints, but it's a good one.
All right, great. Talk to you then. Bye now.
See you, Mike.